that lifts us above the animal creation. What is it that makes you really you? What is it that makes me really me? Why, it's not the color of our skin or the color of our eyes or how tall or short we are or the color of our hair. That which makes us really us is the ability to make rational choices. To take that away denies our humanness. It denies who we are. So God was willing to take the risk of enabling us to make bad choices. He was willing to give us that freedom of choice, knowing that that was a real risk that we'd make bad choices, because he knew that to take that away destroys the essence of human personality. Let me give you an example. Suppose I could program my children.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Great,
I've got 2 little kids.
Yeah, right. I have 3 kids, older now. But let's suppose that every morning I went to a computerized control center in my house, and I put certain buttons in, and my little boy would get up in the morning and say, "Daddy, I will eat my oatmeal. Daddy, I will do my homework."
Now, I've got to say, Pastor Mark, sign me up. This sounds all right.
Right. Then you'd love it when this iron child just put their iron-cold hands on your face and said, "Daddy, I loved you." There's nothing like that little girl Natalie of yours or that little girl Naomi of yours jumping on your lap, sleep in their eyes, runny nose, putting their arms around you, saying, "Dad, I love you," you know. And so you and I want love that's spontaneous, not love that can be forced, not love that can be coerced. And God was the same way.
I think I can see your point. Unless we had the freedom to choose against God, what does our choice to follow him mean?
Exactly.
Right? We're following him out of our own free will. Love is a choice that we make then. It's beautiful. Now, let's get to some of the difficult questions, though. I was reading an insurance policy the other day, and they were telling me they'd cover me for everything except acts of God, right? If God creates a disaster, is the impression you get, then they're not going to cover me. Now, where do calamities come from? Where does suffering come from? If there's a devil and there's God, why do they call it an act of God?
Well, they probably ought to call it an act of the devil, right? Acts of God. God does not create natural disasters to destroy us. It is true that Satan is a very powerful being. These natural disasters are the result of a world that is separated from God. And so when you have a world that's separated from God, human beings are affected. Nature is affected. The environment is affected. All of life is affected in what we would call this planet in rebellion. And so it is true that there are raging wildfires. It is true that there are hurricanes and fires and floods and tornadoes, not as conscious acts of God. But, you know, the Bible says that the earth wears old like a garment. The Bible says in the book of Romans that all of creation groans for deliverance. So the natural disasters that we see are certainly not acts of God, but they are the result of a planet that is separate from God, and the result of the activity of the evil one, Satan, who wants to sweep people into premature death.
Now, you're reminding me of an old story. They say it's the oldest one in the Bible, about Job, where Job has wealth, he has a family, he has everything going right, he's a righteous man. He suddenly loses it all. And if I remember correctly, God in that book pulls back the curtain of the cosmos and shows us something interesting. There we find out who was really behind it.
Sure. If you look at Job chapter 1, the Bible talks about a council meeting in heaven, and Satan comes up and he right to the gates of heaven, and beings evidently from unfallen worlds come. The Bible says that they gather together there in heaven, and Satan comes up to the very gate of heaven, and he says to God, he taunts God, he says, "Look at your servant Job. You've given him everything. Just withdraw your hand." And God does not cause Job's troubles, but God allows them to take place to demonstrate a purpose. And through it all, the Bible says Job doesn't curse God. In fact, Job himself says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And the Bible says that at the end of the book of Job, most people like to read the beginning of the book of Job, but if you look at the end of the book of Job, in the last chapter of Job, the Bible is quite amazing, because Job answers the Lord in Job 42, verse 2. And Job, the 42nd chapter is the last chapter in the book of Job. He says, I know that you can do everything, God. No purpose is hidden from you. And the Bible goes on to say, verse 12, now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters. And the Bible goes on, and it says that at the end of Job's life, he had satisfaction, joy, and happiness, and far more. Did Job suffer? Yes. Was he faithful in that suffering? Yes. But he came through that suffering far better off. And Shawn, you know, there may be somebody here today that's suffering. Maybe somebody here today, you're going through real trial, real difficulty in your life. Like Job, you say of God, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. And you hang on in faith and you hang on in trust, and you watch what happens in your life. God will bless it dramatically.
I've got another question for you. You know, and it comes out of Job's experience. Job was a righteous man. Mm-hmm. And I've read other passages in the book of Psalms. The psalmist says at one point, I think it's in Psalm 73, he's lamenting the fact, he says, why is it the wicked prosper? Why do the wicked do well and I'm the one suffering? Now, why is life unfair?
Well, I think at times life is unfair. But wait a minute, there is another way to look at that. Maybe God at times allows wicked people to prosper so that they would see their blessings would come from Him and turn to Him even in their prosperity.
Now, that's an amazing thought.
Yeah. So, see, maybe the prosperity that some of the wicked receive is certainly not the result of their evil deeds and their cheating ways at times. But maybe a God of love is even trying in the good times of the wicked's life to show that He's lavished them with their love, with His love, and try to get them to turn to Him. But maybe if that doesn't work, as the song says, in every life some rain shall fall, and maybe the wicked who seem to be prosperous today, if they don't turn to God with the gentle overtures of His love and prosperity, maybe a son dies of cancer. Not caused by God, but allowed by God. Maybe a divorce breaks up. A divorce takes over and a marriage breaks up. Not caused by God, but allowed as the natural result of their choices by God. And maybe that wicked person who seems, or unsaved person who seems so on top of the world today, maybe they're crushed and bruised tomorrow and they turn to God. On the other hand, maybe some of us who seem to be Christians and are Christians, maybe God is calling us to deepen our Christian experience. Maybe there's, the Bible says, no chastening of the Lord in the book of Romans. At the present time seems joyous, but afterward it brings forth its fruit. So there are times that God does chasten us by allowing us to go through trial to get us to turn to Him.
Right. Well, you know, it reminds me, I had surgery done on both my legs as a boy. It was exceptionally painful. But once the pain subsided, it enabled me to walk and to have a normal life. Sometimes it's surgery, isn't it?
It is.
Sometimes
it really
it's
is.
surgery. Now, another thing that some people point out is, listen, it's pretty easy for God to sit on the sidelines. He's up in heaven, everything's happy there, and we're down here suffering, and He's not here.
You know, Shawn, I visited some years ago Dachau, one of the prison camps, of concentration camps of Nazi Germany, and I walked through the area where the ovens were,